Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's class on Introduction to Supply Chain Management. I hope you all are doing very well. So, let me just start off with talking a little bit about supply chain management. And one of the things we'll be doing in this lesson is really trying to understand what this word means. And, I want to start off by telling you that supply chain management is all around you. If you are looking at your computer right now, your computer has a story of how it originated, the materials that have been put into your computer. Perhaps it was manufactured in a different country and it was imported. And perhaps the materials that were used within the computer were actually procured from several different countries. And goodness knows how long it sat on a ship and how many vehicles it was put on for it to reach where its final destination, in your homes where you are, using your computers. And so, if it's a really fascinating world we're living in. In the morning, when you wake up and you're having breakfast and you're having, a piece of toast, even that toast has a story of where it originated. The toast actually, if you really dig back and think about where the genesis or where the beginning of the toast being made was, well, it was the seed that was put into soil, and wheat was then grown, and it was processed, and it went probably to various factories, and then maybe to a distribution company, and finally to a retailer. And then perhaps you or someone in your family purchased it from a store. I mean, what a long story, an interesting story, even a piece of toast has. So, you know, some stories, like the piece of toast, has a story that is, limited to Pakistan. And other stories, like the story of how your computer was made, um, this is an international story. Regardless, there is a story behind everything that you are using. And actually, if you start thinking about it, it's pretty overwhelming kind of a concept. But it is very real and very true. The question is, where does all of this movement happen? How come we don't see a lot of these goods being transported around town? Because there's so many stories, there's so many products, and there's so much of transportation from one party to another, transfers. Well, the answer to that is that almost all the transportation trucks that carry goods operate at night. So when we are fast asleep, the roads are taken over by huge trucks, and those trucks have lots of products that are then sent to various stores, and or from manufacturers to distributors, and from distributors to retailers. So all of that action is actually happening while we are fast asleep. And in the morning when we go to the stores, they are full of the products that we desire. So the world of supply chain management is absolutely fascinating. How goods travel, via, it could be via plane, could be, by railroads, could be on ships, on trucks, and, managing all of that, making sure that customers' demands are met on time, and in the right way with the right products and the right services. This is a very complicated task that companies have to do. And so especially nowadays, you have, this term of supply chain management has become very popular, and you hear it on the news, especially since we've been going through a global pandemic. We've a lot of times, especially on international news, they talk about how supply chains are being impacted. So this has become a catchphrase. It's something that everybody is talking about, supply chain management. And so it's very important, I feel, for everybody to know a little, especially for people that want to work in any organization. It's important to know the basics of supply chain management, because it is extremely helpful, regardless of whichever function you end up working in. Okay, so that being said, I'm now going to talk to you just a little bit about the definition of supply chain management. So since I started this lecture, I gave you two stories, a story about a piece of toast and also a story about a computer. And if you really think about these stories, or the story behind any good that you're using, if you're drinking, water from, let's say, a glass, the story of that glass, well, there has been the glass, or the piece of bread, or the computer has moved from one party to another, from one place to another. So there has been a physical movement of the good before it reached its final destination. Also, when it has been moving from one party to another, let's say from a manufacturer where the good is being manufactured. So let's talk about the computer, and the company where it has been manufactured, they sell it to a distributor, right? And so when they sell it to a distributor, there is an exchange of money in the supply chain as well. And finally, there is always an exchange of information. For example, the distributor would tell the computer company how many computers it would like to buy. And based on that, the computer manufacturing company would produce that as many computers as there is demand for and sell it. So the net result, and long story short, in any supply chain, there is a flow, or of three things. One is the physical good, right? The second is financial or money flow. And the third is information flow. And if you look at any supply chain, you will see that there are these three flows: physical, financial, and information flows between various trading partners. And ultimately, what happened, the purpose of a supply chain is to fulfill a customer request. So the journey of a good completes itself when it reaches the consumer. So it starts at various, right at the beginning, and then it ends where it meets the demand of a customer. So again, very, very important for you to be very comfortable with the definition of supply chain management, and understand, about the flows and about, the final destination of the products, and that they are, all right. Next up, I'm going to talk to you a little bit again about the purpose of a supply chain. I kind of touched on this, but I'm going to repeat myself because this is a very important concept in supply chain management. The purpose of any supply chain is twofold. The first one I just mentioned on the last slide is to satisfy a customer's needs at the end of the supply chain. So the whole supply chain is working. Why? For the end purpose of meeting a customer's needs, right? Whatever the customer desires. So that's the ultimate purpose of any supply chain, to satisfy or to delight the customer and to meet their needs. Secondly, there's another purpose of supply chain, which is to maximize the total value across the supply chain. What does this mean? You want to be able to generate money, as much money as you can across the supply chain, along the supply chain, and reduce your costs. So in supply chain management, there is, a constant effort to reduce costs, and to obviously everybody across the supply chain wants to make profits. So, increase the value or the money that's being generated across the supply chain and decrease the costs. So two things, these are the two purposes, again, to satisfy the customer's needs and to maximize the total value generated across the supply chain. One very important thing for you to note is that any supply chain usually has multiple firms. Let's just look at the term supply chain management. So there are three words. The first one is supply, and of course it's about meeting people, the end customers' demands, so that makes sense. And the next word is chain. And if you ever look at a chain, there's usually at least three different links for it to be called a chain. If it's just two, it's not really a chain. So that's the third word, which signifies that there are multiple firms that work together, in supply chains. And finally, it's, the third term is management. And of course, this, means managing so many different factors in a way that is efficient and effective. And we will learn a lot more about all the various things that, managers need to keep in mind when they're managing, various supply chains. Okay, next I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the history of supply chain. I mean, has supply chain management, this term, has it been around for several centuries, or is it relatively new? Well, it's a little bit of both to answer that question, because originally there was a word by the name of logistics, and that was what dates back to the Roman military. And logistics was used, as I mentioned, in the Roman times, and it was all about, managing supply of various goods, arms or ammunition, all of these things in a very efficient way. And but logistics is a very limited term. When I was doing my MBA, and this was a long time ago, around early, I would say 2000, this word didn't exist in business supply chain management, at least not in business education. The word that existed was operations management. So this word, actually, supply chain management, first came about in 1982. It was, it was originated by a management consulting firm. They mentioned this term, and with, in the recent times, with all changes of globalization, transportation, communication, this word started becoming very popular. And in the whole aspect of e-commerce and international trade grew so much that operations logistics became an outdated word, operations management became an outdated word, and the new term that started being used was supply chain management. So now, supply chain management is a rather large field. It involves planning, implementation, controlling efficient and effective forward and reverse flows of goods and services. And so, what does this mean? So, it basically means, selling goods from one party to another. That's so. Let's say I'm a manufacturer and I'm selling something to a customer. That's a forward flow of goods. If for some reason there is a problem in the product and the customer returns it to me, that's a reverse flow of goods. So in supply chain management nowadays, both of these things happen, right? So there's, you sell, and then there's also this aspect of returning goods. And this has become more common because of e-commerce. So the whole, landscape of supply chain management has drastically increased. It's not just logistics, it's not just operations management, it's a lot more. It involves so much more. In olden days, there was no concept of returning goods, just didn't happen. Nowadays it does. There's so many other things nowadays. Goods, on the internet, they get reviews. Never used to happen before. So we're living in a very different world. We're living in an era of the internet, and it's very fast paced. Consumer remains, is king. And companies are having to deal with a lot of varied new things, new trends, and they're having to customize goods. There's just a lot going on in the world of supply chain management. So just wanted to give you a flavor that of the history of supply chain management. So that's about that. Now on this slide, let's look at this. This is interesting because this is called the SCORE model, and this has been made by the Supply Chain Council, which is a global institution. And here you can sort of see lots of activities going on. This slide basically covers everything that really happens in a supply chain. So usually there is a supplier who's, of goods, and then there's a customer. So that's pretty self-explanatory. And here you can see that in any supply chain, the first thing that needs to happen is planning. Okay, if a supply chain is being made, it just doesn't start on, like somebody has an idea and it just happens immediately. It doesn't work that way. There is a whole planning process that happens. After that, suppliers generally go and they source the materials. They buy either some materials, and then they make it, and finally they deliver it to the customer. And so either the supply chain kind of just ends over here. However, let's say for some reason the good was defective or wasn't really working very well, then in that case there may be an aspect of reverse logistics. So far you've been seeing all the arrows going from left to right, but here you can see a little bit of reverse logistics where the customer is sending goods back to the supplier. And this may be, and this is something that nowadays, companies are having to deal with. And so either they can reimburse the customer, or they can, decide to fix the product and send the customer a new product, or, a refurbished product. So this is, just to give you an overview of what supply chain management really is all about. If you have to, because I had mentioned it, there's a lot of activities going on, but this is the high level, really, really high level view of supply chain management. there's tons more activities that go on between all of these and within each step, but you know, on a very high level, these are the main um, steps of any supply chain. Now, it's important to think about supply chains as a system. And you know, a system is really what I'm talking about is a series of activities that are linked together, and on all working towards you know, a final destination. uh, and again, you know, the whole idea is to maximize the value across supply chains, and not just across as any, so it's not about just, you know, having one department doing well or one part of the supply chain that's doing well. It's about having all the parties perform extremely well across the supply chain, and only then can the value be maximized across a supply chain. uh you know, we're living in a very dynamic world. There's so many things happening in any particular day and age. If we look at the last 10 to 20 years, there you know, the world has seen periods of, you know, terrorism. There's been global pandemics. We've gone through so many you know, disruptions and difficult times, pretty much all the countries across the world. And so, you know, all the supply chains really need to be able to absorb these shocks and be resilient and continue to function regardless of disruptions, and neutralize the disruptions as much as possible. So you know, in the world of supply chain management, there we learn a lot about making, you know, how to build in resiliency and how to make supply chain management, the supply chains as strong and robust as possible, so that they can manage pretty much any challenge or disruption that comes their way. Now, in the recent past, there have been a set of challenges in supply chain management. And I think now is a good time to just kind of briefly talk to you about, you know, what's going on in the world of supply chain. What are the challenges? So the first challenge is, how do you measure a supply chain? You know, there's so many parties involved in a supply chain. Sometimes you don't even have access to, you know, you just have access to the party that you're dealing with, not the supplier of your supplier. So but it's important for you to really have that access, right? To have that transparency, because the ultimate objective of supply chain is to maximize value across supply chains. So the point is, net net, how do you measure how efficient any supply chain management is? This is a challenge for supply chain management nowadays. Then there is this whole, you know, global politics and power, and you know, what's happening in politics impacts businesses in a very big way. And sometimes it's fair and sometimes it's very unfair. And this is a challenge in supply chain management, because, you know, devaluation of currencies or appreciation of currencies really impacts, you know, demand on a global level. So many other aspects of politics that impact international businesses. So this is a challenge in supply chain management. Next is visibility. This is also very important, because it's very important. Let's say, God forbid, you know, some company sells some goods, and for some reason it turns out that maybe it's a food product, and perhaps some people got very sick by eating the food product. If that company wants to recall their products, then they really need to know where exactly their products have been, who the final consumer is of their products. And so sometimes companies have access to this information and other times they don't. But it's very important to have visibility of your final consumers, and also visibility of your suppliers. You know, where did you get your the materials that you used in your product from, that may have caused the problem. And so it's important to have upward and downward mobility in any supply chain management. Um, Another challenge in supply chain management is dealing with uncertainty, and there's so many aspects of uncertainty. Sometimes it's their delays across the supply chain, and you have to sort of deal with those delays. Customer demand, I mean, sometimes it increases, sometimes it decreases, and there may be internal or external factors that impact customer demand. Manufacturing yield, how much you're being able to manufacture in a certain period of time. There could be, a variability in that. So there are a lot of things that are going up and down externally for any company, and sometimes it's very difficult to plan around all these variables that are constantly changing, but it is required in supply chain management. So this is definitely a challenge. And finally, global operations. Look, nowadays, it's a global economy that we're living in. It's a global village, and so it's very difficult to do global business, because you're dealing with countries that have different laws, different languages, different cultures, different methods of communication, and different lifestyles. So you're catering to people all across the globe, and you have to do it in a good way. You're dealing also with various supply chain parties or trade parties in different parts of the world, in different time zones, and you kind of have to be able to manage all of this in a very good way. So this is also a very big challenge in supply chain management. And so this hopefully gives you a flavor of how many moving parts there are in any supply chain management. So that brings us to a conclusion of what supply chain management is. But next, I'm going to talk to you now about globalization. And so this has been the main reason that has changed the world as we know it. The last 20 years of the world has been very, very different. If you look at the world history, this particular period has seen um, an enormous amount of change. And the change that has come is because of globalization. So it's very important for us to all understand exactly what globalization is. Um, how did it start? What happened in the past 20 years or so? And is globalization good? Has it been bad for us? How does it impact all of us? So let's talk a little bit about this. And the first thing I'm going to start off with is talking to you a little bit about what globalization is. So globalization is the process of having one global economy, one method of politics around the world, and one kind of culture across the world. And so all of this started in the year 2000. And so what happened is the United Nations, kind of called all the countries together and said, look, let's sign this agreement called the World Trade Agreement. And so far, all of the countries, all of you countries have been looking after your own businesses, and you've not really been encouraging imports of other countries' goods. But let's try something different. Let's reduce the import duties or eliminate them. and let's move towards one economy and one global village. And lo and behold, all of the countries across the world signed the World Trade Agreement. And that was the beginning of globalization. Did anybody sort of any of the world leaders ask the general population if they should do this or not? No, nobody, none of the general public was asked. This was just a group of world leaders' decision, and they all signed it, and that was that. Also, in the last, something that coupled that has happened at the same time as globalization is an increase in transportation, and the transportation has become very cheap now as compared to the past, and also communication. So making a phone call, a long distance phone call from one country to another, used to be extremely expensive. And this is not so many years ago, by the way. About 20 years ago, there was no WhatsApp, there was no none of these Skype or anything like that. You had to pay. And 30 years back, even more so. And if you think of 40 to 50 years ago, then at that time, letters were being sent from to instead of phone calls, because phone calls were so expensive. And so letters were being sent as a means of communication, and those letters would take up to a month or more sometimes to reach from one country to another. So there's been a lot of change, in the last 20 years. Again, taking a flight from one country to another has become relatively cheaper. There's a lot more railroad transportation available, many more options. So these are just some things that have happened in the last 20 years or so. So next, I want to talk to you a little bit about what has this globalization been good or bad, right? So let's start off with talking about the bad. What are the bad things that have happened because of globalization? And then after that, I'm going to switch over and I'm going to talk about the good things that have happened because of globalization. So one of the disadvantages, or one of the negative things that has happened across the world as a result of globalization, is that there's a lot more income inequalities. And what does this mean? This means that the rich are becoming richer and the poor are becoming poorer. And this is happening not in one country, but pretty much across the entire world. So that's something that's not a very good trend. Next, what has happened is, look, businesses are working in various countries, and not every business person is out there looking, to make the world a better place. So many times the companies, multinationals work in, low income countries, and they really don't take care of the local population there. And so there's a lot of negative impacts that happen as a result. Next, another disadvantage of globalization is that, third world countries or poor countries, businesses don't always get access to first world country markets. And the reason is that there are a lot of protectionist policies that industrialized first world nations put. And so they don't really they filter out the third world businesses from entering their markets. So it's not exactly always a very level playing field. Another thing is has been an increase in banking and currency crises. And the thing is that there's been a lot more shifting of money from one country to another over the last 20 years or so as compared to before. It's become easier. And this is causing, problems. There's a lot of corruption also involved. We saw, a huge banking crisis that had a ripple effect throughout the world and caused, a depression, economic depression. So, these are some of the disadvantages of globalization. Also, there are lower, environmentally, there's been a lot more increase in pollution because there's so many more goods being produced, more goods than ever before. If you talk to your grandparents, they will tell you that at the time they were growing up, they didn't, when they used to go to the market, let's say the season changed, they would have, they would buy some clothes, but never in such abundance as people are able to buy nowadays. So there's been an increase in the amount of goods being produced in the world, and this is obviously, the pollution has gone up, and we're facing a climate crisis. Also, there's this whole idea of having one universal culture, and some people say it's the Western culture, and really dislike it, but ultimately, it's a reality that these global leaders, when they decided on one global village, this was a pretty much, this was bound to happen. And so several countries don't like it. They say, look, what about our own culture, what about our own traditions? Unfortunately, those are being washed out. And so that's another disadvantage of globalization. And finally, there are various things such as pandemics that are happening, where we just saw, with the whole coronavirus and or COVID-19, that it becomes very difficult to control these kind of pandemics or these kind of problems, because people are traveling from one country to another. The way the global economy is, it's sometimes, there's no choice but for executives to travel from one country to another just to remain in business. Okay, wow, that was a lot of disadvantages of globalization that I just told you. So was it a really bad decision? Well, before we come to any conclusion, let's talk about some of the advantages of globalization. So look, with globalization, any business has access to the world market. Fine, there may be some countries that have protectionist policies in place, but still, there you have access to a huge market. Before, businesses would have access pretty much just to their local markets, but post globalization, they have access to large world markets. Also, businesses have more access to capital flows, technology, human capital. Imports are cheaper, and there's larger export markets. Just to explain this, you now businesses can import the best machines in the world. Before, it used to be very, very difficult to do that. The import duties used to be just way too high. Also, you can invite experts in any particular field to come in to help you. Consultants can come in. You can hire them internationally to help you improve your business. You can have access to capital markets, so you can work with banks across the world to facilitate your business. And so these are all advantages for as a result of globalization. Also, think about it now, businesses, pretty much wherever you are in the world, any business person, once they start producing and selling locally and internationally, they are part of this whole international trade. And before, it used to be very difficult to become part of the international trade network. Very few companies were able to enter that arena, but now it's become a lot easier for companies. Also, another advantage of globalization is that transportation has become faster and cheaper. I had mentioned this earlier as well. If it's definitely become faster. So going from one country to another, it's getting faster. There's so many more. There are bullet trains being made, and so there's new inventions that are coming up. But the whole there has been, it's become a lot faster and definitely cheaper to try to go from one country to another. Also, as a result of globalization, there's been a lot more communication. I also mentioned that, the internet also kind of entered the arena around the same time as globalization. So, it's a chicken and egg kind of situation, which came first. But yes, there has been an increase in communication. It's faster, instantaneously now. You can send an email, it will reach any part of the world within seconds. Communication, you could have a video chat with anybody in the world for free. If you spoke to somebody and told them this concept 70 years ago, they would probably not have believed that it could ever happen, but this is happening nowadays. So communication has been huge, and it definitely helps with in this whole in the global trade. um, Also, there's been a great increase in the rate of innovation. There have been so many new inventions. The aeroplane is not a very old invention. If you look at the history of the world, it's a rather recent invention. Televisions is a recent invention. Radios, television, even the light bulbs. I mean, if you look at the in world history, it's a pretty recent um, innovation. And so the rate of innovation is drastically increasing, especially with with the internet and with computer science and artificial intelligence. So there's just a lot of increase in innovation. Finally, life expectancy has gone up. Previously, people used to die at the age of 40. Then it's been going up, and now it's 90s. People are living on average till their 90s or hundreds. So life expectancy has definitely gone up. In general, people are more healthy, and education is becoming more widely accessible because of digital education and the internet and accessibility, smartphones. So education has also been increasing. All right, and let's talk briefly about the impact that globalization has had within Pakistan. And unfortunately, not a very good report card for Pakistan, when we're talking about how they've dealt with globalization. And the reason is that exports really went down. A lot of the businesses have been having a very challenging time in the global marketplace competing, because it's a very there's a lot of pressure. Quality has to be amazing, but the cost and the prices have to be ridiculously low. So not very few companies are being able to be successfully compete at that level in the global marketplace. So domestic industry has definitely suffered, and as a result, there's been an increase in unemployment. Um, the country has incurred more debt, um, and over the last 20-40 years, and income inequalities have also increased. The rich have become richer and the poor have become poorer. With all of the decrease in tariffs and globalization, unfortunately there has also been an increase in drugs and terrorism. um, there have been cultural changes, and we can see that there's been a little bit more of a polarization within the society. So there's definitely some people highly westernized, and others you know um, becoming extremely religious. So that has kind of, those are some of the various trends we've seen. And some good, some bad. Overall education quality has also gone down over the last 20 years or so since globalization has come about. So unfortunately, not a very good report card for Pakistan, but there are certain countries that have fared extremely well as a result of globalization. So China, prior to globalization, was considered a third world country trying to improve itself, but they really got ready for WTO. They signed the document a few years later. They prepared themselves. They worked extremely hard, and over the last 20 years or so, they have become one of the biggest economies of the world. India has had several challenges, but they again really specialized in the IT field, and they also did well in several other areas, and they have been winners in the and have greatly benefited from globalization. Also, if we really think about it, a lot of the multinational companies in the world have greatly benefited from globalization. And interestingly, some of these companies, the net profits are bigger than the gross domestic, the GDPs of various countries. That's how rich multinational companies have become after, as a result of globalization. So, we're looking, on this map here on the slide, you can see, big names: HP, BMW, Marlboro, Pepsi, Microsoft, Walt Disney, Google. These are McDonald's. I mean, these companies have pretty much penetrated every single global market, and so they have been the winners of globalization as well. So, again, when you're thinking about all of this, one does wonder, why did we ever start doing international purchasing? I mean, why didn't we just focus on local markets? And the honest truth is that as a result of globalization, you can get better quality goods now in any country and at a lower cost. And if countries were just insulated themselves, they would never have, the local population would never have access to these goods. Those that fare well in the international arena, global international arena, they are making a lot more money than they could ever have in the previous regime prior to globalization. Several of these things I have already spoken about in the other slides, but I just wanted to sort of mention over here all of these things. A few additional things on the slide to consider. One of them is tax considerations. So a lot of countries decide to do business or manufacture in other countries because of tax leniency given to countries. So that's one of the big benefits of international, being able to do international businesses. Okay, one thing I want to talk about is, has globalization been fair to everybody? And the answer is no. It's not been fair. The reason is that, countries, there have been countries that international bodies and national governments, like for example, United Nations, has imposed economic sanctions on them. And this is kind of like a punishment for countries, economic punishment. And, Iran, Cuba, Russia, Syria, these are some of the countries who have had economic sanctions put on them. And when that happens, basically, it's virtually impossible for them to compete in the global arena. So it's not always fair. There is an aspect of politics that also is that plays into the economic arena. And I kind of mentioned this a couple slides ago, and it's very important to remember that. One thing also that happened after globalization was introduced is that various trade blocks were made, and I kind of, this slide talks to you, gives a little bit of a history of this whole WTO agreement. First, there was an agreement called GATT, and that was the the rough draft, and then WTO was made. Anyways, once WTO was made, after that, there were some trade blocks. One of them was NAFTA, and this was a trade bloc of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And another trade bloc that I'm sure all of you have heard about is the European Union. And so what has happened as a result is that, within Europe, there are several very small countries, but once they made the European Union, they have a common currency. It's visa-free entry from one country to another, and they make the whole import duties are very low between the countries in the EU. So NAFTA really didn't work out as well, but the European Union did work out. So this is also a result that came out of globalization. Now, one thing throughout this presentation, I've been talking about inequality of wealth, and this chart, I just kind of wanted to share this with you. Here, these blue dots, this is the wealth of the richest 1% of the world. And you can see that the richest 1% have been becoming richer. And this green line and these dots represent the wealth or the share of global wealth of 99% of the world. In the year 2015, which is, 5 years ago, the richest 1% had more money than 99% of the world. And this basically means, I just want to I'm going to go back to that slide very quickly, but 8 men own the same wealth as the poorest half of the world. And that's a very astonishing kind of a fact. So, with all of these good and bad, many people have thought a lot about whether or not globalization has been a good idea. There have been certain world leaders that say, you know what, forget it. We're just not ready. We need to increase the import duties because we need to, help fix our trade balance and help our own local companies. So they have increased the, import duties, but they can't do it for very long because they have signed these agreements of WTO. When big leaders such as the managing director, Christiane Lagarde, was of IMF, she's the MD, managing director of IMF, when she was asked about globalization and whether it's a good approach or not, and she said this is exactly what she said: to turn our back on globalization is to turn our back on helping development. It's exactly the wrong approach. So a lot of the big international firms or agencies want to continue moving forward. They don't feel that globalization should be stopped. As I mentioned, there are some world leaders that think it may have been a big mistake for them, but so far the world is moving forward. It has no intention of stepping back and going back to sort of protectionist policies to protect their own industries. Now, the amount of global exports has exponentially increased as a result of globalization. I have been mentioning this. There have been more goods being manufactured. There have been more goods being traded. There have been more goods being consumed, more than ever before in the history of the world. If you look at 1800s, this was the amount of exports, and oof, look at this, increase, increase, increase. So lot more goods, and there's also a lot more waste. So we have a lot more plastic and old clothes and all of these things, because people just want to keep on buying, right? So this is a phenomena that is very important for all of us to know. So I'm reaching the end of this presentation, but I do want to say one thing, that this whole idea of an increase, the rich becoming richer and the poor becoming poorer, this is causing a lot of distress across the world. And you see pretty much, from France to the Arab world to pretty much any country, the poor people across the world are getting very, very upset. They're finding it very difficult just to survive. And it's we're seeing a lot of protests as well. So that's one part of the thing to consider. But another thing to consider is that the people that were really below the poverty line, those people have decreased. So the poor have become poorer, but the extremely poor, their situation has improved over the last 15 years. That the statistic of extreme poverty has actually gone down. It's been halved. So these are just a lot of very interesting facts and figures. And it's important, we're all global citizens, it's important for us to be knowledgeable about these trends, to understand them. And you need to understand the overall environment in order for you to understand supply chain management, because supply chains are working within the parameters of the world as we know it today. So first we need to know what's going on in the world, and then we can get into understanding what's going on in supply chains within companies. So with that, I come to the end of this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much, and I hope to speak to you again soon.